And so far we've looked at vertical and horizontal shifts when we add and subtract things on the inside and the outside, and vertical and horizontal scalings when we multiply by a factor either inside or outside. And so a couple of things to summarize, and that is these outside transformations, they result in vertical transformations. So they're going to affect the y coordinates but leave the x coordinates of each point alone. And the inside transformations, they result in horizontal transformations. So they're going to affect the x coordinates but not the y coordinates of each point. And just remember, we need to be careful that these inside transformations kind of behave what I would call the opposite of what we might expect. So when we subtract on the inside, for example, we move the graph in the positive direction to the right. And when we multiply by a number bigger than 1 on the inside, that means we actually compress the graph by a fraction. Okay, so lastly, what we're going to take a look at in this video is what we call reflections. And just as before, when we multiply on the outside by -1, this is going to have the effect of a vertical reflection. And what we mean by a vertical reflection is we're going to take the graph and reflect it over the x-axis. And when we talk about horizontal reflections, when we multiply by -1 on the inside, this is going to result in a horizontal reflection. And what that means is we're going to take the graph and reflect it over the y-axis. So we're going to spin it around like that. So let's take a look at an example and see how these behave. Okay, so in this example we have a graph y equals f of x, which is given above, and in parts A and B we want to describe the transformation that's been made and then sketch a graph of the resulting transformation. So in part A, here's our graph that we start with, the graph of f, and here we are multiplying by -1 on the outside. And so as before, outside transformation means it's going to be a vertical transformation, and multiplying by -1 means we're going to have a reflection. And this means that we're going to flip the graph over the x-axis vertically. So the graph is going to get spun around the x-axis. So each point we get its reflection on the other side of the x-axis. So this point at -2, 6, it was 6 units above the x-axis. Now it winds up on the other side 6 units below. So it winds up at -2, -6 over here. And we do this for every point. So this point at -1, 4, it winds up at -1, -4. And the point at 1, 4, it winds up at 1, -4. And the point at 3, -2, now it gets flipped over here, and it winds up at 3, +2. So connecting these points, here's our resulting graph. We've taken this graph in black and we have flipped it over the x-axis. We have a reflection over the x-axis. And so cleaning part A up, here's the result after performing this vertical reflection. In part B, we now are multiplying by -1 on the inside. And so inside transformation means we have a horizontal transformation. And since we're multiplying by -1, that means we have a horizontal reflection. And so this is going to result in a flip of the graph over the y-axis. So we're going to take this graph and flip it around the y-axis. So each of these points, we're going to get the mirror image on the other side of the y-axis. So this point at minus 2, 6, it now gets flipped horizontally and winds up at positive 2, 6. So we can mark that point over here. So we're going to change the sign of the x-coordinate of every point. This point at minus 1, 4, well, it now winds up at 1, 4. So it gets flipped over. And the point that was at 1, 4, these two swap places. It gets reflected over and it winds up at minus 1, 4. And then finally, this point at 3, minus 2, it winds up at minus 3, minus 2 over here. And so connecting these dots, here's the result that we get in blue. And cleaning the graph in part B up, we get the graph in blue, which is this graph that we got after flipping it around the y-axis.